A blinding streak tore across the desert sky, and for a moment, America held its breath. When It Came from Outer Space hit theaters in 1953, it didn't just bring aliens to Earth. It brought humanity face to face with its own crippling paranoia. Written by the legendary Ray Bradbury and directed by the great B-movie auteur Jack Arnold, this film flipped the entire alien invasion formula on its head. In a decade defined by hostile invaders and bug-eyed monsters, it dared to paint the visitors from the stars not as malevolent conquerors, but as terrified, misunderstood castaways. This wasn't a simple story about war. It was a profound and unsettling story about fear, the quiet and insidious kind that hides in plain sight, right behind the eyes of your friends and neighbors. These are 16 weird, unbelievable, and hidden facts about It Came from Outer Space, the film that made the 1950s look to the skies and wonder if the real, terrifying threat was already here among us. A legend born from the mind of the great Ray Bradbury. Before a single camera rolled or the lonely desert winds howled, It Came from Outer Space began in the powerful, poetic, and deeply human imagination of Ray Bradbury, one of the greatest and most influential science fiction writers of all time. Universal Studios, hoping to elevate their slate of monster movies, hired the literary giant to craft a film treatment, which he originally titled The Meteor. In a brilliant display of his thematic genius and his understanding of human nature, Bradbury delivered not one, but two complete versions of the story to the studio. One version depicted the aliens as hostile, aggressive invaders, a story that would have fit perfectly into the typical mold of 1950s sci-fi paranoia. The other, much more radical and thoughtful version portrayed the aliens as peaceful, almost gentle explorers who had simply crash-landed by mistake and were desperate to get home. In a move that shocked even Bradbury himself, the studio, a factory known for churning out creature features like the creature from the Black Lagoon, chose the gentler, more empathetic, and more challenging story. Bradbury's unique and unmistakable literary fingerprints are all over the final film. The lonely and beautiful desert setting that feels both vast and claustrophobic, the small-town dreamers who are open to wonder, and the poetic, almost philosophical dialogue that turns a story of fear into a profound meditation on humanity itself. He saw aliens not as monsters to be destroyed, but as mirrors, reflecting our own fears, our own prejudices, and our own capacity for both violence and understanding back at us. This was a truly radical and subversive idea for 1953, and with it, Ray Bradbury's powerful empathy changed the shape of mainstream science fiction forever. The aliens weren't invaders. They were stranded and terrified in a decade where nearly every spaceship that landed on a movie screen carried death rays and dreams of global conquest. It Came from Outer Space did something completely and utterly unthinkable. It made the aliens innocent, and in doing so, made humanity the villain. When a strange, fiery object crashes in the Arizona desert, the townspeople, conditioned by the intense paranoia of the Cold War and a steady diet of pulp sci-fi, immediately assume the worst. But the truth, as our hero John Putnam discovers, is that the alien visitors are not hostile. They are simply a crew of explorers whose advanced ship has broken down, and all they want to do is repair it and leave our primitive, violent planet as quickly as possible. They are forced to mimic human forms, not as a tactic of infiltration, but only to blend in and gather the materials they need for their repairs, all while being terrified of the inevitable violence they know is coming once they are discovered by the fearful and trigger-happy humans. This brilliant and subversive twist flipped the entire alien attack formula on its head. Instead of being a simple story about brave humans fighting off evil monsters threatening their way of life, it becomes a much more complex and unsettling story where mankind itself, with its suspicion, its guns, and its blindness to the unknown, becomes the real threat to a peaceful first contact. The movie dared to ask its 1950s audience to sympathize with the other, a concept that was years ahead of its time. Long before E.T. ever phoned home, Ray Bradbury's aliens were already begging for a little bit of mercy and understanding. Director Jack Arnold fought the studio to keep the monsters unseen. The executives at Universal Studios wanted a thrilling, in-your-face spectacle. They envisioned glowing eyes, slimy rubber claws, and all the cheap, schlocky jump scares that the new and exciting 3D technology could provide. But the film's director, the great B-movie auteur, Jack Arnold, had something much smarter, more artistic, and ultimately more suspenseful in mind. He was a firm believer in the Hitchcockian principle that true fear works best when the audience can't quite see what's hiding in the dark. Instead of splashing the alien monster all over the screen, he masterfully used deep shadows, eerie reflections in the desert heat, and unsettling flickers of strange movement to build a powerful and almost unbearable sense of suspense. The very first glimpse we get of the creature is from its own alien point of view, a distorted, wobbly, almost liquid-like lens that makes the human world look strange and threatening. It became one of the most memorable and unsettling shots in all of 1950s sci-fi. Arnold reportedly argued fiercely with the studio executives to delay the full reveal of the monster for as long as possible, even threatening to walk off the picture if they forced him to include early, cheesy close-ups. His artistic restraint paid off magnificently. By keeping the aliens mysterious and largely unseen for most of the film, he forced audiences to use their own imaginations, creating horrors in their minds far worse and far more personal than any rubber mask or puppet could ever deliver. Universal's first foray into 3D changed sci-fi forever. In 1953, the 3D movie craze was exploding across America. Studios, terrified of losing their audience to the new and powerful home entertainment medium of television, were desperate for any gimmick that could pull people back into the movie theaters. Universal, a studio not known for big-budget spectacles, decided to gamble big on the new technology, and It Came from Outer Space became their very first feature film produced in the 3D format. The production crew had to use a massive and incredibly clumsy dual-camera setup that projected two separate reels of film side by side, which were then combined by polarized lenses in the audience's special glasses. It was a heavy, hot, and painfully slow system to operate, but for audiences of the time who had never seen anything like it, the results were jaw-dropping. Viewers in the theater swore they could reach out and touch the fiery meteor as it seemed to scream across the screen and directly into the audience. But unlike other studios that used 3D for cheap, forgettable jump scares, director Jack Arnold used it artistically as a tool to create a sense of immersive depth and paranoia. He used it to pull audiences deep into the vast, lonely desert landscape, giving every tumbleweed, every rock, and every long, dark shadow a sense of eerie, three-dimensional presence. Critics at the time were stunned that a simple gimmick could be used to create an effect that felt so poetic and atmospheric. Suddenly, 3D wasn't just a trick, it was a powerful storytelling tool. The Meteor was a dangerous practical effect made of real fire and iron. The film's unforgettable and iconic opening scene shows a blinding streak of fire tearing across the dark night sky. A meteor crash that sets the entire terrifying story in motion. But that incredible fiery moment wasn't a fancy optical trick or an animation. It was a dangerous, ingenious, and brilliant piece of practical effects wizardry. The meteor was actually a hollow iron sphere, about the size of a large beach ball, which had been filled with burning magnesium to create a brilliant, white-hot, fiery glow. This burning sphere was then suspended on a series of nearly invisible wires. The special effects artists filmed the sphere in slow motion as it traveled along the wires against a stark black backdrop, with sparks and smoke trailing behind it. This footage was then carefully composited into the shots of the dark desert sky. The result looked otherworldly and genuinely dangerous, especially in 3D, where it felt like the flaming rock might slam right into your face in the theater. On the set, the crew nicknamed the dangerous prop the Fireball. because every single test shot risked setting the entire soundstage on fire. The magnesium burned incredibly hot, and if the timing of the shot was even a fraction of a second off, the prop could melt the wires or even explode mid-take. But the danger was absolutely worth it. The spectacular crash became one of the defining and most memorable images of all 1950s science fiction. The film was shot in the real, scorching and unforgiving Mojave Desert. The film's dusty, oppressive, and palpable sense of isolation wasn't just good acting or clever set design, it was completely real. A significant portion of it came from outer space, was shot on location in the brutal and unforgiving landscape of the Mojave Desert, near the small towns of Palmdale and Victorville, California. The cast and crew had to endure punishing and almost unbearable heat that regularly scorched the delicate film equipment and completely drained the actors. The relentless desert winds constantly blew fine sand into the expensive and delicate 3D cameras, tore at the lighting rigs, and left the entire crew in a constant and exhausting state of battling dehydration. Director Jack Arnold was insistent on using real, desolate landscapes to achieve a sense of authenticity that a comfortable soundstage could never provide. So, the team had to haul the incredibly heavy 3D cameras and other equipment across vast sand dunes that would often hit temperatures of 120 degrees Fahrenheit by midday. Actors later recalled almost hallucinating from the intense glare of the sun as they stumbled through take after take, pretending to chase meteors while desperately trying not to faint from heat exhaustion. But the grueling and physically punishing experience was worth it. The on-screen horizon looked endless and infinite, and the sense of human isolation felt completely and terrifyingly real. That vast, shimmering, and empty landscape became a silent and watchful character, all on its own. Actress Barbara Rush won a Golden Globe for her groundbreaking performance. When it came from outer space premiered, no one, especially not the serious film critics of the time, thought it would turn its leading lady into a prestigious, award-winning star. But the talented and intelligent actress Barbara Rush, who played the brave and empathetic schoolteacher Ellen Fields, brought something incredibly rare to the sci-fi genre in the 1950s. A performance of genuine warmth, sharp intelligence, and a quiet, believable strength. In a genre that was so often populated by screaming, helpless heroines, her character was a breath of fresh air. Amid all the paranoia and the panic of the alien encounter, she grounded the fantastic story with a believable and relatable human emotion. And both audiences and the Hollywood Foreign Press Association noticed. A year later, in a move that surprised everyone in Hollywood, she won the Golden Globe Award for Most Promising Female Newcomer of 1954, beating out actresses from far bigger and more prestigious dramatic films. Barbara Rush herself later admitted she never saw it coming. She thought the movie was just another fun space picture, not realizing how much its intelligent and human core had resonated with audiences. The prestigious award immediately launched her into major studio roles throughout the rest of the decade, making her a bona fide star. The uncredited composers, including a future legend, who invented the sound of space, that eerie, quivering, and deeply unsettling electronic sound that opens the film, the one that makes your skin crawl before a single alien ever appears on screen, came from three men whose names never even made it to the final on-screen credits: Irving Gertz, Herman Stein, and a very young and then unknown composer named Henry Mancini. Together, this uncredited and overworked trio of studio composers created one of the earliest and most influential space soundscapes in the history of cinema, using the strange electronic warble of the theremin, blaring and dissonant brass instruments, and experimental tape layering techniques. They made the very air of the desert seem alive, humming with an invisible alien electricity. At the time, Universal's rigid studio system treated its staff composers like factory workers. They were paid flat fees for their work, with no on-screen acknowledgement or residuals. Still, their groundbreaking and unforgettable score helped to define how outer space and alien encounters would sound in movies for the next 2 decades. It was haunting, melodic, and full of a deep and profound mystery. The great Henry Mancini, of course, would later go on to win multiple Academy Awards for iconic scores like Breakfast at Tiffany's and The Pink Panther. But his very first, uncredited brush with the cosmos started right here, in a dark and forgotten sound booth. The rejected monster design that ended up in another, more famous classic film Universal's legendary makeup and creature department. The same one famous for its classic monsters like Frankenstein and Dracula, went wild designing the strange and terrifying look of the aliens, for it came from outer space. Early sketches and prototypes for the creatures showed towering, terrifying, and brilliantly designed insectoid beings with huge, glassy eyes and strange, almost octopus-like tentacled faces. But the film's director, Jack Arnold, thought these designs, while visually spectacular, looked too grotesque and overtly monstrous for the story's more empathetic and mysterious tone. He wanted mystery and a sense of the unknown, not a typical bug-eyed monster that audiences had seen a dozen times before. The studio, trusting his vision, agreed, and shelved several of these elaborate and expensive designs before settling on the shimmering, amorphous, one-eyed look that is only briefly glimpsed in the final film. But those brilliant, rejected monster concepts didn't stay buried for long. Just 2 years later, some of the very same molds and design ideas were dusted off, tweaked, and reused to create the iconic and terrifying Metaluna Mutant in Universal's 1955 full-color sci-fi epic, This Island Earth. What was considered too weird and too monstrous for Ray Bradbury's poetic aliens became the perfect look for a full-blown cosmic showdown in another classic film. Ray Bradbury's father was the secret, personal inspiration for a key character. In the movie, one of the most grounded, likable, and relatable human characters is the humble telephone lineman, a simple, everyday working man who is one of the first people in the town to encounter the strange alien presence and have his identity borrowed. That specific and seemingly random character detail wasn't random at all. It was a deeply personal and loving tribute from the film's writer, the great Ray Bradbury. The character of the lineman was based directly on Bradbury's own father, Leonard Bradbury, who had worked for many years as a power and telephone lineman in Tucson, Arizona. Growing up, Ray would watch his father, a quiet and hard-working man, disappear into the vast and lonely desert to repair cables under the endless, silent skies. That powerful and poignant image of a lone, solitary man, surrounded by the static and the silence of the immense desert, listening for faint and distant signals in the dark, stuck with him for his entire life. When he wrote the story for the film, he wove that beautiful and personal memory into the narrative. The lineman in the film became a powerful and subtle symbol of connection, a human bridge between our ordinary world and the great, silent, and listening unknown. It's one of the key reasons the film feels so deeply personal and so profoundly human, even amidst its special effects and shadows. The pervasive Cold War, paranoia, that shaped every single line of the script. It came from outer space, landed right in the heart of 1953, a year when America was gripped by the absolute height of McCarthyism, a deep-seated and pervasive nuclear dread, and a constant, all-consuming fear of communist infiltration. The filmmakers, both Ray Bradbury and the director Jack Arnold, deliberately and brilliantly used that intense cultural and political tension as the film's true, invisible villain. The aliens in the story, who can perfectly replicate humans, could look like anyone, sound like anyone, and be anyone. This was a perfect and terrifying metaphor for a society that was afraid that the enemy might already be living next door, disguised as a friend, a family member, or a neighbor. Every scene in the film hums with that palpable and suffocating unease. Neighbors whisper about each other with suspicion. The town sheriff, a figure of authority, begins to doubt his own eyes and his own sanity. And paranoia spreads through the small, isolated town faster than any truth. Yet, unlike most other sci-fi films of the era, which were simple us versus them propaganda stories, this one brilliantly and subversively turns that paranoia on its head. In the end, we learn that the aliens are not the real danger. We are. It is our own fear, our own prejudice, and our own trigger-happy instincts that turn the peaceful desert into a potential battlefield. Ray Bradbury's quiet, bitter, and lifelong war over his screen credit behind the scenes of the film. A different and much more personal kind of battle was brewing. Not over aliens or 3D cameras, but over the simple and crucial issue of authorship. The great and celebrated author, Ray Bradbury, had written the original story and the detailed, scene-by-scene film treatment that had birthed the entire project and defined its unique tone. Yet, when the final on-screen credits rolled, another screenwriter, Harry Essex, received the sole and official screenplay credit. Bradbury was reportedly, and justifiably, furious. He claimed for the rest of his life that Essex had mostly just tweaked some of the dialogue, while the story's structure, its unique and poetic tone, its memorable characters, and even much of its specific, lyrical wording were his own. Universal's legal team, however, downplayed Bradbury's immense involvement, arguing that his initial outline, or treatment, didn't technically qualify for an official screen credit under the strict guild rules of the time. But film historians who have since compared Bradbury's early drafts with the final film all agree his voice is unmistakably and powerfully present. The lonely desert towns, the philosophical monologues, the deep and abiding empathy for the alien outsiders, these are all classic and undeniable hallmarks of his unique writing style. He may have lost the official credit on paper, but he did not lose it in the eyes of history. The lost and beautiful message of peace, ending that was never filmed. Ray Bradbury's original treatment for the film ended on a powerful, beautiful, and poignant note of quiet wonder and hope. In his version, after the aliens have finally repaired their ship and are about to leave our hostile planet, they were meant to leave behind a final, glowing, and undeniable message of peace and understanding, written in the desert sand for all of humanity to find. It was meant to be a final, hopeful act of connection between the two very different worlds. But the studio executives at Universal, ever fearful of audience reactions, thought this ending was too sentimental, too soft, and perhaps even politically risky during the intense paranoia of the Cold War. They wanted mystery and a sense of lingering unease, not a clear message of mercy and hope. The beautiful and poetic final gesture was cut from the script before it was ever filmed. The film now ends with the spaceship simply and mysteriously vanishing into the stars, leaving humanity and the audience uncertain and uneasy. Bradbury reportedly mourned that decision for the rest of his life. He saw it as the very soul of his story, the final and definitive proof that understanding and communication could ultimately conquer fear. The strange and unconfirmed rumor of a famous comedian's secret cameo, among the oddest and most persistent legends that has floated around, it came from outer space for decades, is the claim that the famous comedian and television personality, Morey Amsterdam, who would later become a household name for his role on The Dick Van Dyke Show, appears in the film in a tiny, completely uncredited cameo. For years, fans have slowed down the footage, paused grainy frames, and have sworn that they can spot him, dressed in a helmet, as one of the background soldiers during the chaotic and crowded crash site scenes. But no official production records, no call sheets, and no Universal payroll logs from the time have ever listed his name as being part of the production. Film historians have tried to confirm the persistent rumor for decades, but it remains one of those strange, unprovable, and fun Hollywood mysteries. Some even think the supposed resemblance might just be a trick of the early, imperfect 3D lighting or the film grain, which often distorted the faces of background actors in wide shots. Whether it's a real, hidden cameo, or just wishful thinking from fans, The idea of a beloved sitcom star accidentally wandering into a classic alien story is a legend that's just too fun to let go of. A low-budget hit that miraculously and unexpectedly doubled its money. For a film that was made on a relatively modest budget of around $800,000, it came from outer space turned into one of Universal's biggest and most welcome financial surprises of 1953. The studio, which had been nervous about the film's serious tone and lack of a traditional monster, had been expecting a niche sci-fi curiosity at best, a simple B-movie to fill out a double feature and hopefully break even. Instead, the film earned over $1.6 million in domestic rentals alone, effectively doubling its initial cost and becoming a highly profitable hit. That was a massive return for a thoughtful, dialogue-driven story that had no big-name stars, no city-destroying monsters, and almost no traditional action scenes. Audiences, it turned out, came for the exciting promise of the 3D spectacle, but they stayed for the suspenseful mystery and the intelligent story. Strong word of mouth turned the film into a steady earner across the country, playing for months in drive-ins and at Saturday matinees. The surprise success of the film proved to a skeptical Hollywood that science fiction didn't need to rely on cheap explosions or giant ants to sell tickets. It just needed a great idea, a powerful atmosphere, and a touch of genuine, relatable humanity. The film that taught Hollywood to fear its own reflection. When the desert dust finally settled and the credits faded, It Came from Outer Space had done more than just entertain audiences. It had quietly but profoundly redefined what a science fiction film could be and what it could say. It wasn't just about aliens and meteors. It was about us. It showed that humanity's greatest and most profound fear wasn't an invasion from the skies, but the terrifying realization that we, with our own fear and our own prejudice, might actually be the villains in our own story. That powerful and introspective shift from simple external horror to a more complex and unsettling internal one rippled through every great sci-fi film that followed. Later movies of the decade, like the even more paranoid Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and even classics that came decades later, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, all trace their thematic DNA back to Ray Bradbury's lonely, thoughtful desert. Even decades later, filmmakers still cite the film's deep empathy, its haunting atmosphere, and its poetic tension as a major turning point for the genre. It was the moment science fiction grew up, the moment the genre stopped just screaming about monsters and started asking difficult and uncomfortable questions about ourselves. It Came from Outer Space wasn't just another flying saucer flick. It was a mirror held up to the anxious and uncertain human condition. Beneath its B-movie title and its sometimes clunky special effects, it carried something timeless and profound: empathy. Ray Bradbury's original story and Jack Arnold's moody, atmospheric direction turned what could have been a simple invasion tale into a powerful and lasting warning, not about aliens, but about us, our fear, our suspicion, our desperate and often violent need to control what we don't understand. 70 years later, its quiet and thoughtful message still lands like a signal from the distant stars. Curiosity is braver than fear, and understanding is the only thing that truly keeps us human. The meteors, the desert, the echoes of the 3D spectacle, they're all just on the surface. The real story is what happens when we finally stop pointing our weapons at the unknown and start listening.